Welcome to Do It Yourself Deluxe. This YouTube channel is a channel where I do very intense, very unusual, and creative do-it-yourselves and projects. And sometimes I tell stories that goes along with them in this new series I'm doing. One of the projects I've done is this moon garden. And today I'm going to be planting up the moon garden with moonflowers, specifically bulbs that are white and bulbs that smell nice at night. So essentially a moon garden is a nighttime garden. And the story I'm going to be telling while I'm planting out is a Dracula story. It's a true Dracula story where I have a painting in my Airbnb, which this is all part of my Airbnb, where people rent out for Airbnb and such. So I have a painting in my Airbnb that is connected to Dracula. Not the blood-sucking one, but Vlad the Impaler. So I'm going to tell this story of how I have a painting, I have two paintings in my house that is related to Dracula via a kind of interesting prince who ran around pretending he was a king. So I'm going to be telling this true story, my story, as I plan up my nighttime moon garden. If you like this kind of content with strange and unusual do-it-yourselves, like this arch that I did, this moon gate, and other stuff, and stories and do-it-yourselves, please subscribe to this channel. I also have an Instagram. It's called Wandering Peacock House, which is also my Airbnb. TikTok with the same name, and I'm gonna start a Patreon where I'm really gonna do a deep dive into a lot of these projects. And maybe a deep dive into some of the stories and tours and things like that, because I have a lot of interesting gardens going on, and yeah, it'd be nicer to take a closer look into that. So if you like those things, you can also go to my Patreon. It's Do It Yourself Deluxe. So enjoy this video. Essentially, a moon garden is a nighttime garden. Not to be confused with planting by the moon, which is a totally different thing. And that's very deep. Honestly, I don't quite understand planting by the moon as of yet. I don't grasp it so much, but moon gardens, I pretty much, after having a year of one, I totally get. And it is a wonderful thing by a patio. I have a moon garden connecting my outdoor dining for my Airbnb guests with a hot tub and a sauna, and it's amazing to have by anything you'll be using by night. I strongly recommend planting out a moon garden with any outdoor spas or dining areas, and I don't know, I think they are the best garden for that location because it's a nighttime garden. So let me explain. So there's two elements with a moon garden. There's foliage, which is the actual leaf, and things like variegation and colorant of the leaf, and that's very important. But the flowers are, I would say, the most obvious. And nighttime flowering is white, so that white flower is really attracting pollinating insects at night. So therefore it glows at night. It glows so the insects find the flower, and it also has the most amazing perfume at night. So for a daytime garden, usually the flowers tend to be colors like red or purple or bright colored flowers for the day. Well, those flowers don't show up at night. So that's really kind of cool. And when you walk through a moon garden, everything does have a glow with the moonlight. It's really, you can't really get a great sense with it with videos or photographs, but it's just something you have to experience. Side note, I started using this bulb planter cylinder, and I'm not a tool person, and at first I bought it and I was like, this is so stupid, I regret this purchase, but it's really a game changer. Like 100%. It's super easy to use, and it just makes everything go by faster once you get the hang of using it. Last year I planted everything by hand with a little shovel, and this is just like game changer, so I recommend. So my story is like a family story. You know how families have their like
funny stories that they tell. And so this is kind of this. It gets a little different because I go to another country and I get like a different side, and then I Google and I'm like, wow, it's deeper than I thought. But it started with my aunt bringing home what she thought was the king of Romania. And it's interesting because, you know, mothers and daughters should have a bond where like they complain about the person they're dating, or, you know, just vent. So I guess my aunt was venting about dating this king and how he had no money and he was broke. I'm hitting like a rock here. And it was difficult for her to date him. God. So, you know, she would complain about that with my grandmother. And the reason he was broke and he had no money, like he had zero money, is because he was a king without a kingdom. The communists at that time in the 80s controlled Romania. So the royalty were just like booted out broke. And I guess, you know, if you look at history, this happens like quite a bit, that, you know, you're living high in your country, and then as a royalty person, you know, times change and a form of government, the new government doesn't seem to like the monarchy, and suddenly you're broke in New York, right? And so my aunt was a little embarrassed because she would go out to dinner, like always these like really nice places, because my aunt was like, she was like a princess type. So they would go to these nice restaurants and people would pay the bill, because in New York, I guess high society, which I'm not a part of, don't judge, but I guess New York high society, you know, people like to host a king, have a king at their table. So like this broke king would just get free food and stuff. And he was, of course, living with my aunt, and she was, you know, taking care of his residence. So he was just, you know, it was like a little bit like the Lady and the Tramp. You know how the tramp goes to the restaurants and people are like, hey, Trump. It would be like, hey, King of Romania, I'll go feed you. And it embarrassed my aunt. I don't think it would embarrass me, but it embarrassed my aunt, so she would tell my grandmother about it. And you know how that is. And so when my aunt brought the King of Romania home, she presented him with a meal, and she was like, fit for a king. And she kind of said that in a joking, kind of not so nice way. She was like a funny, not nice person, but I loved her. My grandmother, that is. So she presented a meal with like a joke. And I guess he laughed and it was all funny, but it was like a funny memory with the family. And I, you know, that stuck with me. I always remember that story. And my aunt had his painting, had a few paintings in her apartment. Now, the paintings were, he was selling, I think he was selling as if he painted them, but turns out they're from, you know, painted in Rajasthan. But they kind of look, you know, I associate it with, you know, Dracula, Romania. Yeah, I'll get to that later. So that's, you know, the beginning story, the first part of a couple more parts story of the Prince of Romania in my Airbnb.
This is sort of a side note, but it's something that's important for this time of year to do while you're planting out your bulbs, is to just evaluate what plants are not happy. I have a silver mound, which is not liking its location. It's experiencing root rot, getting too much moisture, and I'm replacing it with a Japanese painted fern. I'm really sad about this because I prefer the silver mound, which is kind of like a consistent coloration throughout the plant of like a bluish, glowing color. And it really does glow at night. It looks like a moon, like you're on the moon. It has this fluffy texture to it that's just so magical, especially against the other variegated plant next to it. And I don't like putting two variegated plants together. I like to alternate the feel of the garden. So having some plants with nice scented flowers that are white mixed with a variegation, mixed with these frothy silver mound plants. So, but unfortunately it's not happy, so I have to move it to a location that it might enjoy more. And we have a saying in writing where it says sometimes you have to kill your darlings, which means basically you have to do what's best for the overall situation. And you might have a vision of the silver mound looking beautiful, but it's still a plant. And if it's not happy in its location, you have to see about moving it to a location that it might like better. It's not getting so much moisture and will be much more happy.
So my aunt ended up breaking up with the king, and she found out he wasn't a king at all. He was just a prince, which is not a big deal. I think that's still pretty awesome. So, but the point I'm making is, and I think she felt a little betrayed, is that he was running around saying he was a king when he was a prince. So it'd be like the Romania situation of like Prince Harry going around and saying he's the king when he's not the king, you know? He's a prince. So it's a similar situation than something like that. So my aunt didn't break up with him because of that. Like, that wasn't it. It was really the fact he was broke, I believe. And I don't know. I wasn't part of that relationship, so I can't even say what was going on. But they broke up. She broke up. She dumped him. She dumped the prince. And it was just like a family story at that point of, you know, Romanian love that didn't work out. So I was 20 something at the time, and I went to Europe for the summer. I got a job in Europe, Bosnia actually. And so I saved up money from my job, and I started traveling Eastern Europe. And I actually didn't think of going to Romania. I followed like another backpacker. Once you get to Europe and you want to, if you don't mind staying in, you know, crappy hostels and such, it's kind of cheap. It's like $10, or it was $10 a night for a hostel. And so I was hostel backpacking with other people. So I went with a very nice British girl to Romania. It was a big adventure at the time. And in retrospect, it wasn't that long. So I went in the early 2000s, and I don't know when he got reinstated. So when I was there, I discovered the prince and the royal family got reinstated. So reinstated means that you get like your property back. So the country was communism in the 80s, and then I guess in the 90s, when communism kind of collapsed in that area, things freed up, and they gave back stuff to the royal family that was theirs. So this prince and the king, the real king, got their stuff back. They got reinstated. And I didn't know that until I was talking to locals, and I was telling the story about the prince. And I said, Prince blah, blah, blah. And they said, oh yeah, Prince blah, blah, blah. He got reinstated. And that's where I found out he got Dracula's castle. And I visited it. I visited Dracula's castle, and the whole time I was like, damn, my aunt shouldn't have broke up with him. That'd be pretty cool to go visit the prince in Dracula's castle. So Dracula's castle, I guess it's said to be a castle where Vlad the Impaler, I think, was born. It's in Transylvania. It's very white and beautiful on top of a hill, a little eerie, but kind of a cool spot. And you could Google it. It's, I believe it's called Bron Castle, which I was confused. I sound like such an idiot. I didn't do enough research, but I was like, isn't it Bram Stoker, Dracula? Like, I was so confused the name, and it seemed to tie to Dracula like in a couple of ways, and so I don't know the whole story. You could comment in the comment section and say I'm an idiot and I should have done my research, but I did some research because I was like, last year, I decided to do some research on this for something else, and I found even more crazy stuff. Ah, yeah.
Word advice with putting in bulbs is that should be the last thing you put in your garden. So first, with gardening, there's a little bit of a hierarchy where you first put in your backdrop plants, which are your evergreens, then your shrubs and your perennials. And bulbs are just really the last thing you want to do, and it's a very practical reason why you do that. It's because if you're planting out any of those things, like, and you'll hit a bulb. So if you're planting out a shrub in a garden, you planted your bulbs first, it's kind of really, really hard and wasteful because you're hitting all your bulbs. So it's kind of the last thing to plant out. Now there are bulbs that are like they don't last very long, like tulips in general. They kind of dwindle out, like, so they're not super they don't last so long. But certain things last longer, especially I would say daffodils. So you kind of want to, take care of them and do them after, put them after you've done your other planting. Another thing to consider when planting bulbs is to consider that a lot of the stuff when you're planting will die back. So right now I'm planting around a big bush, but come spring, I'm gonna have to cut back that bush. It's not gonna be nearly big, and so when the bush comes in, like this hydrangea for example, it really gets big and frothy and beautiful in August, September, and the allium is going to get big and amazing in May. So in May, the allium is going to pop up, die down, and then the other thing will get big. So you kind of have to take that into consideration and plant things where, according to where the season they'll come into their height. The other thing is not going to be doing so well. So thinking about how your garden is throughout the season is very vital when planting out bulbs. And it takes a long time, and you're going to make mistakes, so don't worry about it. I made so many mistakes, it's embarrassing. So that's another thing to think about bulbs.
So back to the paintings in my Airbnb. I know this is like a full circle kind of story, but circling back to my Airbnb, recently my aunt decided to do a renovation. While they were doing work, they accidentally burned one of the Princess King's paintings. Now, like I said before, there are paintings done in Rajasthan. I don't know if he was going around saying that he painted them himself, but he would use this of ways of like paying, like he needed to pay for a place to stay, so he would give them a painting and charm people, and he would, go through life like with selling these paintings. Again, I don't know if he said he painted them or not, but I'll get to that later, that there's some other things he did which it wouldn't surprise me. So she burned a little bit of the painting. She was super sad, and she was like, here, take this painting. It was like a little bit burned. I was like, oh, I'll take it. And there's another, she gave me 2 paintings from the Prince of Romania. Now, as tacky as it sounds, I was on TikTok. They're like, do you have a haunted story that you could share with your subscribers? And I was like, haunted story, I do actually. I have a Dracula story. So I was like thinking of posting something. I posted a little bit of something, but not much. I was thinking, I decided to just like Google the situation, to find out who was this prince? Like, what was this story? So I Googled it, and I found out he's actually called the Pretender King or the Pretender Prince. Basically, he goes around and he says, I'm king, I'm king, I'm king. Even though the king is like reinstated, everything's like completely settled. The king is a king. he still, goes around saying he's the king apparently. So he's called a pretender king. I guess that there's some disputes. It's like, what is that family reunion like? I mean, is he going up to the king being like, you're the imposter, I'm the real king? I have no idea. I'm not part of that world, but I thought that was interesting. But it got even worse. He's a fugitive. Basically, he likes to say a property is his that isn't and sell it and then go to Paris. So he doesn't even like Romania, it seems. He just likes to go to Paris. That's like his thing. Which, if I got a country and I was like a princess, I would make that my thing. I'd be like, I'm the princess of this country. I'm gonna be positive. I'm gonna really, that's my thing, right? If you're a princess of a country, you should be proud. You shouldn't just go off to Paris. But that's kind of what he does. He sells a piece of Romania that isn't his, and he goes off to Paris, which goes back to Ron Castle, Dracula's castle. When I was there, all the Romanians were like, oh yes, he inherited it. The prince inherited Prince Paul. I usually don't say names. That was a slip. No names. So the prince inherited this castle. That's what all the locals were saying. But I couldn't find anything about that. In fact, I found out that now it's owned by a Habsburg person, which is strange. So maybe he inherited it and he just sold it like he likes to sell everything else. No idea. But when I was going through Romania, it was really cool to know that, to see that, to know that you had a story with the situation. And that I have a painting that is, okay, it's loosely tied, but it's still tied to Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, with his castle. There's a connection, which I find amusing and cool. So if you like this kind of story, please subscribe to my channel. I have other do-it-yourselves. Again, a TikTok and an Instagram called Wandering Peacock House, and a Patreon where I'm going to do more do-it-yourselves explanations and walkthroughs of a lot of the projects I'm doing. I know the story is a little bit strange, but I'm a little bit strange. So I hope you enjoyed again, and make any comments if you think I should do other stories or not do them, or if I'm crazy. I don't really care. And have a beautiful day. Goodbye.